I was standing in the living room, still wearing my gardening gloves, when my son placed a thick folder on the kitchen counter. "Just sign it, Mom. It's the paperwork for the trust we talked about." I blinked. I hadn't talked to him about any trust. My heart thudded a little harder. Something about the way he avoided eye contact, the way my daughter-in-law stood behind him, arms crossed, not saying a word. They both looked serious. Urgent, even. I picked up the folder. The legal language blurred in front of my eyes. I'm no lawyer. I've always trusted my children, but suddenly I didn't feel very safe. "Let me read this," I said. My son sighed. "You don't have to. It's just standard stuff. We're trying to protect your assets, that's all." I looked at him. The same boy I'd once walked to kindergarten in the pouring rain, wrapped in my old red coat. The same boy who used to cry when I left for work. Now he was asking me to sign away something, but wouldn't tell me exactly what. That's when I knew something was wrong. That evening I didn't sleep. I sat at the dining table, the folder, unopened in front of me. My mind raced. I kept asking myself, why now? What's the rush? Why not just explain it to me? The next morning I called a lawyer. I felt guilty, like I was betraying my own children. But deep down, I knew, if they had nothing to hide, they wouldn't mind me getting a second opinion. What the lawyer found changed everything. But what? Started as a gesture of love, turned into something far more disturbing. My name is Eleanor Rhodes. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in Rhode Island nearly my whole life. I was born in a 2-story clapboard house just outside Warwick, and raised by parents who believed in hard work, honesty, and keeping your word. 4. Most of my adult life I worked as a school librarian. It wasn't a glamorous job, but I loved it. The smell of old books, the rhythm of quiet learning, the way children's eyes lit up when they found a story that felt like home. It gave my life a quiet kind of joy. I was married once, to a kind man named Thomas. We were together for 33 years before cancer took him away from me. We had 2 children together, my son Daniel and my daughter Meredith. After Tom died, I tried to keep things normal. I stayed busy, volunteering at the library, joining a quilting group, and walking every morning before sunrise. But anyone who's lost someone knows, it's never really the same. The house felt bigger. The silence grew heavier. My children visited when they could, but they had lives of their own. Daniel worked in real estate. Meredith moved to Connecticut after marrying an accountant. I didn't see her often. That was okay, I told myself. That's life. Kids grow up. They build their own worlds. Still, every now and then, especially in the evenings, I'd feel it. That quiet ache in the chest. The kind that comes when you realize the phone hasn't rung all day, or when you cook too much dinner out of habit. Then came retirement. I thought retirement would feel like freedom. But it felt like drifting, like I had lost my purpose. I started thinking about downsizing. The old house was filled with memories, but also with responsibilities. Gutters, the furnace, shoveling snow in the winter. I'd slipped on the back steps once and bruised my hip. That scared me more than I admitted. One afternoon, while having lunch with Daniel, I mentioned I was thinking about selling the house. He leaned in, eyes wide. "You know, Mom, you could move in with us," he said. "We've got the extra room now that Lily's off to college, and you'd be closer to the grandkids." I hesitated. I didn't want to be a burden. But part of me also longed for that closeness again, to hear laughter echoing in the hallway, to eat at a full table, to feel needed. Daniel smiled. "Think about it, okay? We'll help with everything." So I did. I thought about it. I talked to my financial advisor. I asked my sister, and after a few months I made the decision. I sold the house, packed up a lifetime of memories, and moved into the in-law suite Daniel and his wife had renovated just for me. At first, it was lovely. They made me feel welcome. There were dinners together, game nights with the grandkids, and even a weekend trip to Cape Cod. I started to believe that this chapter of my life could be just as fulfilling as the ones before it. But little things started to change. Subtle, quiet shifts in tone and atmosphere. Daniel seemed distracted, stressed. He was always on his phone, talking about deals, market crashes, taxes. "Don't worry, Mom," he told me one night after I asked if everything was okay. "We're just looking at ways to keep your money safe." That struck me. My money? I hadn't really thought about it that way. I still had a decent nest egg from my retirement fund and the house sale. I'd always assumed it would go to Daniel and Meredith someday, but I hadn't made any specific plans yet. Then one evening, Meredith visited for the first time in months. She seemed oddly quiet, barely touching her food. After dinner, I caught her looking at Daniel, her eyes flashing with something I couldn't quite read. A warning? Worry? I didn't know. The next morning, Daniel came into the suite with a folder. "Legal documents," he said. "Something about a family trust." "Just to protect your assets," he explained. "You wouldn't want taxes to eat it all up, would you?" I said I'd like to read through it. That's when the tension started. The soft smiles hardened into polite pressure. The warmth became formality. "You don't need to read all that," he said again. "It's just boilerplate, standard stuff." I felt a chill run down my spine. He'd said those exact words the day before. Over the next few days, I noticed small changes. The grandkids didn't come into my suite as often. His wife stopped knocking to say hello. The atmosphere around the dinner table grew quieter, like something unspoken sat in the air between us all. One morning, while Daniel was at work, I opened the folder again. This time I Googled some of the language. Terms like irrevocable and grantor and transfer of ownership made my stomach twist. That's when I called Patricia, my late husband's old friend, who now worked as an estate lawyer. She agreed to meet with me the next day. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't want to stir the pot. I still wasn't sure if I was being paranoid or protective, but the weight in my chest told me something wasn't right. Patricia read the documents carefully, line by line. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she closed the folder, took off her glasses, and looked me dead in the eye. "Eleanor, if you had signed this, you would have given them full legal control over your finances, and you wouldn't have been able to undo it without their permission." My heart sank. I thought I was moving closer to family. I thought I was finding warmth and safety in my final decades, but now I wasn't sure what I'd walked into. On the outside, everything still looked normal. Smiling family photos on the wall, quiet dinners, morning coffee. But something had shifted. Something was broken, and I wasn't sure how long it had been that way. After my meeting with Patricia, I returned home trying not to show anything on my face. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, suddenly cautious, guarded, suspicious. But I had no proof. Not really. Just legal jargon and a gut feeling. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe Daniel didn't fully understand what the paperwork meant either. Maybe someone had misadvised him. Maybe he really was just trying to protect me, just going about it the wrong way. But that hope started to crumble, slowly, quietly, day by day. It began with a smile. One evening, we were all sitting around the living room, me, Daniel, his wife Sandra, and the youngest grandchild, Noah, who was building a tower out of Jenga blocks on the floor. Sandra asked me, so casually I nearly missed it, "Have you thought more about those papers?" I glanced at her. "I'm still thinking. I want to make sure I understand everything before I sign." She nodded and smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was something else. Tight, strained, like someone smiling during a lie. I'd known Sandra for over 20 years. That smile wasn't hers. From that point on, I started noticing more little things. I walked into the kitchen one afternoon to make a cup of tea and heard the conversation drop the moment I entered. Daniel was at the table with a man I didn't recognize, someone in a navy suit with a leather briefcase. They both looked up at me and went silent. "Oh, Mom," Daniel said, standing quickly. "Didn't know you were home. That was strange." I was almost always home. I nodded, pretending not to notice the awkward energy in the room. I made my tea and left quietly. But the next morning, I found a business card in the trash under the sink. It belonged to an estate planning firm. Told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe he was just doing research. Maybe I was reading into things. But then came the door. There's a small hallway between my suite and the main part of the house, and it's always had an open feel. No locked doors, no boundaries, but one morning, when I went to get the mail, I found the interior door locked. Not just closed, locked. I stood there, hand on the knob, heartbeat quickening. It was 10:30 a.m. The kids were at school. Daniel and Sandra both worked from home that day. I knocked softly. Nothing. I knocked again. After a few seconds, I heard muffled footsteps. Then the lock clicked open. Daniel opened the door, eyes wide in faux surprise. "Oh, sorry, Mom. Just having a private call." He looked flustered, like he wasn't expecting me to check. "A private call with the door locked?" I asked gently. He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You know how it is. Background, noise, the dog barking, your TV on." But I knew I hadn't turned on the television all morning. The suite had been silent. I hadn't made a sound. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the ceiling. 1,000 thoughts spun in my head. Was I losing it? Was I imagining things that weren't there? Or was something truly off? I remembered something Patricia had said. Most financial abuse starts with kindness and ends in silence. That silence had started to creep in already. The kids no longer burst into my suite unannounced. Sandra no longer lingered for coffee. Daniel only spoke to me when it was necessary, and always with a strange edge in his voice. Measured, controlled. One evening, I noticed something even more unsettling. I was putting away groceries when I spotted Daniel in the driveway, talking on his phone. His back was turned to me, so he didn't see me standing in the kitchen window. He was pacing. "No, she hasn't signed yet. I know. I'm trying. It's just, she's being more careful than I thought." He paused, then said quietly, "Well, she doesn't have anyone else. It's just us now." I stepped away from the window before I could hear any more. That night, I lay awake again. The walls felt closer. The shadows longer. I kept hearing creaks and whispers I never noticed before. The next day, I found something else. A small, almost insignificant thing, but it chilled me. Inside a kitchen drawer, where we normally kept coupons and batteries, I found a folded Post-it note with a list scribbled in Daniel's handwriting. It read, "Talk to Mom again. Set meeting with Mark Call. Bank retransfer check signature timeline." That last line, check signature timeline, sat heavy in my chest. What timeline? Why the rush? They were planning something. I didn't know what, but the pressure to sign the papers wasn't about protection. It was about control. And somewhere along the line, my trust had become a tool they were trying to use against me. But I couldn't say anything yet. Not without more certainty. Not without knowing the full picture. The last thing I wanted was to accuse my own children of betrayal and be wrong. So I started paying closer attention. I wrote everything down. Every strange comment, every awkward glance, every moment that felt off. I started keeping my own little notebook, hidden inside a hollowed-out book on my shelf. It made me feel ridiculous, like a spy in my own family. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. I needed to know just how deep this went. A week passed after I found that note in the kitchen drawer, and I hadn't confronted Daniel or Sandra. Instead, I waited. I watched more closely, listened more carefully. Every moment felt like a quiet test of my instincts. And the more I noticed, the more I realized how deeply I'd been isolated. Not by force, by subtle choices. A glance here, a closed door there, a dinner I wasn't invited to, a phone call I was never told about. Then, one Friday afternoon, I found something I wasn't meant to see. It was raining lightly. Daniel and Sandra had left earlier that morning, claiming they were going to a financial planning seminar in Providence. The kids were with friends. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I used the time to clean. I needed the distraction. I folded, laundry, wiped down counters, swept the hallway between my suite and the main house. While dusting the shelf near the door to the garage, I accidentally knocked over a stack of old magazines. As I bent down to pick them up, I noticed a slip of paper had fallen out from between two of them, like it had been hidden there. It was a printed email thread. Subject: ER Trust Revision, Urgent ER. Eleanor Rhodes. Me, I skimmed. Through the email chain, my hands beginning to shake. Daniel had been emailing a lawyer, not Patricia, someone else, about adjusting the language in a trust document before presentation. His exact words were, "We'll need to change the clause on medical power of attorney before she signs. Also remove her access to disbursement options, per our conversation. She won't question it if it's worded clean." She won't question it. I dropped into the nearest chair. My stomach twisted. My head buzzed with static. They were planning to remove my rights. They were writing the story of my future in secret, and I wasn't even allowed to hold the pen. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out, get air. On impulse, I rushed outside, rain or not, and stood under the awning, gulping in lungfuls of cold, wet air. That's when I saw something else. Across the driveway, above the garage, I noticed a small black dome on the corner of the roof. It wasn't there before. I knew every inch of this property. That wasn't a light fixture. It wasn't a bird, feeder. It was a camera. I stared at it for a long time. Then I slowly turned and looked up at the gutter near my suite's back door. Another one. Barely visible under the eaves, I felt like my skin had turned to ice. I walked slowly back inside. My hands were trembling as I closed the door behind me. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and searched the model number of the camera online. It took me to a security company's website. Home surveillance, live feeds, mobile access. It confirmed what I already feared. They'd been watching me. That evening, when Daniel and Sandra returned home, I pretended nothing had happened. I smiled, asked them how the seminar was, nodded at all the right times. I needed more information, more than emails and a glimpse of a camera. So I started searching. When they left again 2 days later, this time to take the kids to a movie, I went into the main part of the house and opened Daniel's office door. It was usually closed, but never locked. His desk was neat. His shelves were lined with binders and real estate books. But what caught my attention was a small laptop on the side table, half buried under mail. I opened it. No password prompt. Just a browser left open to a cloud dashboard, the same security company from the website. There were 5 live camera feeds. One showed the front porch, another the driveway, a third the hallway just outside my suite, and the fourth made me sick to my stomach. It was my living room, not the shared houses. Mine, the private part. The place I read books, took naps, talked on the phone with my sister. The last feed showed my kitchenette. The angle pointed right at the table where I sat every morning, drinking coffee and journaling. I shut the laptop gently, backed away, tried not to cry right there. I had to sit down. My legs felt like paper. I was being watched, not just tracked, monitored. My routines, my thoughts, my moments of grief and reflection. All of it recorded like I was some kind of liability instead. Of a family member, and for what? Control? Money? That's when I saw the drawer under the printer was slightly ajar. Inside were folders labeled Eleanor Medical and Trust Strategy, Final Draft. Final Draft. I took them, quietly, and retreated back to my suite. Once behind my own locked door, I laid everything out on the table and began reading. They had prepared everything. Financial documents, healthcare directives, even a new will, notarized but unsigned, that left Daniel as sole executor of my estate. In one version, there were notes in Sandra's handwriting. Remove Meredith, risk of interference. My daughter. Removed from my will, like a business risk. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Not just betrayal, not just manipulation. This was strategy. I called Patricia again, told her everything. This time my voice didn't tremble. She didn't hesitate. Pack a small bag. Come stay with me. Tonight. I'm not ready to run, I said. Not yet. Patricia paused. Then said something I won't forget. You're not running. You're reclaiming your freedom. I hung up, sat in my quiet living room, now no longer private, and looked up at the corner near the bookshelf, where the tiny lens of a hidden camera blinked faintly red. I stared straight into it. For the first time, I let them see the anger on my face. They wanted a quiet old woman who would sign without reading, who would trust without questioning. They were about to learn I wasn't. That woman, not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. The rain had stopped, but my thoughts poured like a storm inside me. My world, the one I had quietly rebuilt after my husband died, had turned unfamiliar. My home no longer felt like a haven. The people I had trusted most now felt like strangers wrapped in smiles and polite conversation. I lay on my side, staring at the outline of my curtains as the moonlight filtered through. I wasn't just angry. I was grieving. Grieving the family I thought I had, the peace I thought I'd earned, and the role I had believed I still played. As a mother, a grandmother, a person whose voice mattered. How long had it been since they started treating me like a project? A loose end? Had it started when I moved in? Or was it before that? When I began handing over small responsibilities, trusting them to help. Trust. That word stung more than anything else. In the early morning hours, I got out of bed and opened the documents again. I read every page, slowly this time. Not as a mother, as a woman who needed to understand the battlefield she'd been dropped into. There were quiet codes in the way things were worded. Phrases like executive authority, and discretionary access, and termination of care oversight. I didn't fully grasp it all, but I understood enough to know one thing. They had taken steps to box me in, legally and financially, and if I had signed those papers, I would have given them permission to do it. I wasn't about to be boxed in. So, I got dressed, made myself a strong cup of coffee, and sat down at my desk with a notebook and a pen. And I started planning. The first thing I did was make a list of what I didn't know. How long had the cameras been there? Who else was involved in this? Was my bank account being monitored? What other documents existed that I hadn't seen? Then I listed what I did know. There were at least 5 surveillance feeds. Daniel and Sandra were corresponding with a lawyer behind my back. A new will had been drafted. My daughter Meredith had been deliberately excluded. I needed help, but not the kind that brought drama to the doorstep. I needed quiet, intelligent support. I called Patricia again and asked her to meet me for lunch. Somewhere neutral, somewhere public. We met at a small cafe 2 towns over, one we used to visit years ago when we were younger and filled with more laughter. When I walked in, she already had a seat by the window and a manila folder in front of her. I pulled some public filings, she said quietly. They've already set up a new trust in your name. You're listed as the grantor, even though you never signed. My stomach flipped. But without your actual signature, they can't enforce it. That's the good news, she added quickly. They're trying to prepare something before you know enough to stop it. I leaned in and asked the question that had been buzzing in the back of my head all morning. Is this legal? Patricia hesitated. What they're planning to do could become legal if you give them the tools. But what they've already done, installing cameras in your private space without consent, that crosses the line, and the fake email trail pretending you've agreed to certain revisions, that could be grounds for fraud. I exhaled slowly. Then I asked her to help me put together a safe plan, one that didn't involve confrontation. Not yet. She agreed. Over the next few days, while pretending everything was fine, I took careful steps. Quiet steps. First, I bought a small flash drive and copied everything from Daniel's laptop. Emails, documents, security footage links. I did it late at night when everyone was asleep, heart pounding the entire time. Next, I contacted my bank directly, not from my phone, but from the public library's computer. I checked every recent transaction, every linked access point. I changed my passwords. I set up security alerts. Then I called my daughter Meredith. I hadn't told her anything yet. I didn't want to believe she had really been written out of my life, but I needed to know where she stood. When she answered, I could hear the tiredness in her voice, the kind people wear when they've been quietly grieving someone who is still alive. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Everything okay? Can we meet?" I asked. "Just the two of us." There was a pause, then a soft, surprised, "Of course." When we met at the small flower shop near her apartment, she hugged me like she was afraid I'd vanish. We sat on a bench outside, and I told her the truth. Everything. She didn't speak for a long time. Just held my hand. "They told me you didn't want me involved anymore," she finally whispered. "They said you were trying to simplify the estate, that it wasn't personal." Tears welled up in her eyes. I thought I did something wrong. I reached for her hand and squeezed it. "You didn't." We sat there in silence, holding each other's hands in the spring sunlight, surrounded by the scent of lilies and lavender. By the time I got home that evening, something had changed in me. I wasn't scared anymore. I was focused. I spent the next few days gathering everything, making digital backups, recording journal entries, creating a timeline. I went through old mail, checked browser histories, even photographed the cameras themselves. It was like building a case, because that's exactly what it was. And when I was ready, truly ready, I would confront them. But not with shouting or accusations, with facts, with proof, with my lawyer and my daughter sitting right beside me. The day of reckoning arrived with a quiet morning sun filtering through my curtains. I felt a strange mixture of dread and calmness, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the fall was inevitable, but also that the landing might finally set me free. Patricia had agreed to come with me. So had Meredith. I told Daniel and Sandra we needed to talk. No details, just enough to bring them into the living room of the house that had become a battleground. When they arrived, Sandra smiled, a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel looked distracted but tried to mask it with his usual confident nod. I sat at the head of the table, Patricia beside me, Meredith on the other side. I opened the folder I had brought with me. It held everything. Printed emails, screenshots. From the security feed, bank transaction logs, even photos I had taken of the hidden cameras. Before today, I began slowly. I thought I knew this family. I thought I could trust you. But the truth I've uncovered tells a very different story. I laid down the first sheet, an email thread between Daniel and the lawyer discussing changes to the trust, the power of attorney, the removal of Meredith. Sandra's face tightened. Daniel's fingers twitched. I clicked on my tablet and showed the live feeds I had saved, the angles pointing straight into my private rooms. Daniel swallowed hard. "I found these cameras," I said, "in places I should be able to feel safe, without my knowledge or consent." Sandra's eyes flickered away. I paused, looking at them both. "This isn't about paranoia or misunderstanding," I said. "It's about control and betrayal." Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, defensive. "You don't understand the situation. We did this to protect you, to keep things from getting messy." "Protect me?" I repeated, disbelief thick in my voice. "By spying on me, by rewriting legal documents without my knowledge, by trying to cut my daughter out of my life?" Sandra tried to interrupt, but Meredith raised a hand gently. "Mom deserves to know the truth," she said firmly. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "We were only trying to do what's best. It's complicated." I shook my head slowly. Complicated, or not, it was wrong, and it stops now. Patricia stood. "Legally, your actions have crossed a line," she said. "Surveillance without consent, forged or manipulated documents, attempts to isolate Ms. Rhodes from her family. These could have serious consequences." Daniel's face paled. I took a deep breath. This family isn't built on secrets or fear anymore. I'm taking back my voice, my rights, and my life. Sandra wiped her cheeks but didn't argue. Daniel looked down, defeated. The power had shifted, not because I raised my voice, but because I stood on the truth, backed by evidence, support, and an unshakable resolve. That day, I realized something. Else I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every moment of peace I deserved. And for my family too, no matter how fractured we'd become. After the confrontation, the house felt different. Less like a prison, and more like a place I could finally leave behind. The air seemed lighter, the walls less oppressive. I knew I had taken the first big step toward freedom, but I also understood this wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. The next morning, I woke early and packed a small suitcase. Not because I was running away, but because I was running toward something, toward myself. Meredith helped me find a small apartment nearby, a place filled with sunlight and space to breathe. It wasn't much, but it was mine. As I closed the door behind me for the first time, I felt a strange combination of fear and relief. I was stepping into the unknown, but I was also stepping out of the shadows they had cast over me. The first night alone, I sat by the window and watched the city lights flicker like distant stars. I let the tears come, not just from sadness, but from the release of years of pain, doubt, and silence. I called Patricia the next day. "We need to file the paperwork to revoke those documents," I said, "and start the process to get the cameras removed for good." She smiled, relieved. "I'll handle it. You focus on healing." Setting boundaries wasn't easy. Calls came, some apologetic, some angry. I ignored most of them. I blocked numbers. Changed email addresses. For the first time in years, I felt the power to decide who I would let in and who I would keep out. Friends reached out. Neighbors brought flowers and homemade soup. Meredith visited every day and we cooked. Together, laughed together, and planned trips we'd never dared to dream of before. One afternoon, while unpacking, I found an old photo album from before the family drama. Pictures of my children playing in the garden, me smiling with my late husband. Moments of pure joy. I laughed aloud at a silly picture of Daniel covered in paint during a childhood art project. Despite everything, some memories were untouchable. I realized then that reclaiming my life didn't mean erasing the past. It meant holding on to what was good, learning from the pain, and choosing what to carry forward. Slowly, peace settled into my bones. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I could love and trust again, starting with myself. The first morning in my new apartment, sunlight poured through the windows like a gentle promise. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and the wooden floors gleamed with a warm glow I hadn't seen in years. I stood by the window, taking in the quiet hum of the city waking up below, the chirping of birds, distant chatter, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting up from the street. This space was mine. Every inch of it. I arranged my small collection of books on the shelf, placed a vase of fresh daisies on the kitchen table, and hung a painting I had bought during a trip years ago, a simple landscape of rolling hills and open skies. Each item was a piece of me, a reminder of who I was before everything fell apart. Gone were the cold, sterile rooms filled with hidden cameras and whispered secrets. Here, the air felt alive, warm, fragrant, and full of possibility. I started my days slowly, no longer rushing to keep peace or hide suspicion. Instead, I brewed my coffee with care, savoring the rich aroma as it filled the kitchen. I opened the windows wide and let the fresh spring air carry away the last remnants of fear. I began new rituals, morning stretches by the window, journaling my thoughts, and watering the tiny herb garden I planted on the balcony. The basil and mint thrived under my attention, just as I was beginning to. The quiet evenings were my favorite. I would light a scented candle, curl up with a well-worn novel, and listen to soft music that made my heart feel lighter. Sometimes, Meredith would visit, bringing stories from her day or her favorite homemade treats. We laughed more in those moments than we had in years. With every small act, I felt myself coming back to life. There were days when the past still cast shadows, memories of betrayal or loneliness that made my chest tighten. But I met those moments with kindness instead of fear. I reminded myself that healing wasn't linear, and that each step forward was a victory. One afternoon, as I sat knitting a scarf for a local charity, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back wasn't just older. She was stronger, quieter, wiser. Her eyes held a spark that had been missing for a long time. I was no longer defined by the betrayal I had endured. I was defined by the courage it took to walk away, to say no, and to choose myself. This new life wasn't perfect. It was real. It was mine. And in the warmth of my cozy home, surrounded by the sounds and smells I had chosen, I found peace. Sometimes the ones who claim to love us the most are the ones who try to control us the deepest. It's a painful truth I never expected to face, but one that opened my eyes to the reality behind the smiles and kind words. Love should never feel like a cage. My journey wasn't just about uncovering betrayal or fighting for legal rights. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my voice, and my peace. The moment I chose to say no, to refuse silence, to stand up for myself, was the moment I began to truly live again. Freedom isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet courage to close a door behind you and walk into the unknown with hope. I learned that strength doesn't mean never feeling afraid. It means feeling the fear and moving forward anyway. It means trusting yourself enough to set boundaries, ask for help, and believe in a better tomorrow. For anyone watching, remember this. Your life belongs to you. No one else should control your story or your choices. Trust your instincts and never be afraid to seek the truth. If you discovered someone watching your every move, what would you do? I invite you to share your thoughts below, your experiences, your fears, or your courage. Because sometimes, the first step to freedom begins with a conversation. Thank you for listening to my story.